Welcome to What's That About with
Joel
and Tina.
Hi.
Hey. So we were just pre-reading. And so,
Oh, this is going to be a fun one tonight.
right, we don't have the answers. We'll just start with that. We don't really know what's that about.
That's why this is called What's That About, right?
Right.
I mean, the whole point is sometimes you ask a question that you don't have an answer to.
Right.
That might be tonight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're reading from 1 Peter verses 1 through 7, and I'm reading from the NIV. Though I feel sure that if you were to read from other translations, it would be slightly different.
And that would be okay.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know what all your translation says, but this is the one that's in front of me tonight.
Okay, here we go.
And once I read it, you'll be like, oh. Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes, rather it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way the holy women of the past who put their hope in God used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. You are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers.
Aha.
Yeah.
You know, what struck me is right off the bat where it says wives in the same way. Well, in the same way, like what? Well, we have to journey back to chapter 2, and the end of chapter 2 talks about how Christ suffered for us, and that he received all these insults and all these things. That's probably not a lot of people's favorite scripture either.
Right.
But, you know, I think one thing that Peter is hitting at, and as well as Paul, is that the relationship between men and women, between husbands and wives, is really, really important. Having a good relationship is extraordinarily important, and it's important to our faith, it's important to who we are, to our church, and to the way that we interact with one another. And I think, you know, what I hear, you know, if you take a little bit of the higher view before we go in a little bit more, is we have a witness for us in Christ, and all these things happened to him that maybe weren't great, maybe weren't fair, and yet he still treated people with grace and with love. You know, sometimes in relationships, not everything is going to be fair. We're going to respond.
Well, fear is like the worst F word ever.
The worst F word. There you go.
It's the 4-letter F word that you shouldn't be throwing around.
Yeah.
But, you know, the other thing that in the same way, one of the things that was in chapter 2 as well is that we are God's slaves.
Yeah.
And there is that concept of you should submit yourselves to those who are an authority to you. Now, he doesn't use the word authority within this husband-wife thing. And I do find it really intriguing that he points out the idea of if your husband isn't a believer.
Yeah.
You know, and I've met several women who have had husbands who are not believers.
Yep.
And I would say that one of them is probably, she's the greatest testimony to me in regards to not just this passage, but to those Paul passages that you talked about. That even though her husband wasn't a believer and didn't want any part of the church, she still was submissive to his desires within their marriage. And she loved being married to him, and is this idea of the outward beauty versus the inner beauty.
Yeah.
Unless you want to talk some more about that first couple.
No, keep going. You're doing great.
I think about that it's really easy to get caught up in what you look like. You know, this past Sunday, I went to church, and one of the things that I had to come to terms with is I had twisted my ankle on Saturday. And it's flip-flop season.
Yeah.
And my outfit would have looked so cute
with flip-flops.
And instead, I showed up with
black socks.
Like black ankle socks and tennis shoes. In the same outfit. Same cute little outfit. And someone said to me, "You look comfy."
Oh, that's such bad code word, you know.
It's not even bad code word. It's flat out. Like, it's like, oh, bless your heart.
Oh,
Don't you know it's flip-flop season? And it's just one of those things that vanity, how much worse my ankle had been after church. And I think that we can get so caught up in, are my nails the right way? And it's probably not just a woman thing. I can't imagine.
Let's be clear on that. It's not. That's
right.
For sure.
Yeah, and I think that it's really easy to get caught up in what looks right on the outside.
Yes.
And I think a lot of what has been going on in the culture recently with all of these celebrities who've come out with things that have been really terrible about them, it's like, well, they looked okay on the outside. And people say that about serial killers too, that
they were the nicest neighbor.
Right, he was such a nice guy. I never even suspected that if all we're really concerned about is the outside, then we're going to miss out. Because it's really easy to do that. I mean, you follow the magazines, you buy the right stuff, you wear it, and that's all there is to it. But to have a gentle and quiet spirit, it takes a lot of work. A lot of work.
And it's hard to cultivate that kind of beauty. We can cultivate that outward beauty. We have standards, I guess, of that beauty all around us. We see it, and there's a standard that we know. But to talk about a standard of inner beauty, that's harder to address. It's harder to talk about, and we don't see standards of it really in very many places. I mean, you might have a mentor, or you might have your mom or your dad, or you might have somebody in your family that you really value because they just have great characteristics, and that might be something that you can point to. But it's a much harder thing to point to and say that's beautiful and that's worthy, and that is the kind of thing I want to pursue.
I think about the story of Queen Esther. So when she was first brought into the harem, it was like a year of beauty treatment.
It was a beauty contest.
And I heard someone say recently that the average woman has more access to beauty treatments than any queen did back in the day. That what we have access to is that kind of beauty treatment on a regular basis.
Sure.
But the thing that set Esther apart, yes, she was beautiful.
Yeah.
But it was that quietness, that when it came time of trouble, when it was that moment in which her people were in trouble, she didn't put on her fanciest dress and put on more makeup and more jewelry. What she did was she fasted and she prayed, and she called others to fast and to pray, and it was out of that fasting that she was able to determine what she should do. Oof. And I think that there are examples of it throughout. There's also the story of Lydia, the woman who made coats for all the widows. That when she died,
the purple cloth dealer.
Yeah, the purple. But she also, when she died, and all the widows were like, look what she did for us, look what she did for us. It wasn't like, oh, she's so beautiful, or it was the work that she had done.
Right.
And I think, that is something that can be really easy to overlook, especially if your job as a woman doesn't have the high price tag to it, doesn't have all the benefits. If you're a stay-at-home mom, that's not going to be the type of lifestyle where you're going to end up on, the 7 o'clock news. Well, you could end up on the 7 o'clock news, but you're not going to be in the award shows. They're not having you walk the red carpet. And I think that there are lots of jobs like that women take, and in some ways we're made to feel less because of the fact that those are the types of jobs that we're called to.
So let's talk about husbands.
Oh, you want to just skip straight down to the husbands now? You're done with that? Okay.
Well, we can go back to it.
Okay.
But I wanted to bring that up because, I think where Christians especially have gone wrong over the years is where they see these commands to the wives and stop before they even get to the husbands. As if it's just the responsibility of the women, of the wives, to be submissive or to...
So as if like verse
That's-
7 wasn't there at all.
Right.
Like,
Right.
so 1 Peter 3, 1 through 6.
And that's it.
And that's it.
7 doesn't
Sorry.
even exist.
There's nothing in
Right.
that chapter beyond that. Well,
See-
maybe there's something in verse 8.
Yeah, I don't know. There's like a mystery verse in
Right.
between the two.
Yeah.
But that has led to a significant amount of grief, a significant amount of issues. And men have, unfortunately, abused these scriptures for their own benefit, which is exactly not the point of these scriptures. The idea is we're meant to be in relationship with one another, and we struggle with that because, we're different. We have different strengths, we have different weaknesses, we have different ways that we communicate. And so here, Peter is trying to address that and say, husbands, be considerate as you live with your wives. Treat them with respect. Treat them as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life.
I love how you just skipped right over that,
And-
that weaker part.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that, we'll certainly get to that. I wanted to treat that separately.
Oh,
but,
okay.
But, this calling out to husbands to do right by your wife. Treat them well.
Well, it's very much so like Paul's command that they're not...
Love your wife.
Love your wife. Whereas, that respect your husband, love your wife.
Yeah, submit.
Submit to your husband, consider your wife.
Yeah.
That these are things that we naturally struggle with. I think that it can be very easy for men, and maybe I
To
should
be considerate. Sure.
Yeah.
And it's just, be thoughtful about your wives. That when you make decisions about what you're going to do, think about your wife. Think about if she likes that. Think about if she cares about that. And you know what? Sometimes, as a guy, I don't always think about that. I think, this is what I want. So it's a good thing for me to hear from Scripture to say, hey, be considerate of your wife. Don't forget about her. Think about what she wants to do. Think about her thoughts. Think about her life. And, that's it. I could never get to the end of that reminder to me.
Right. Well, I think that the same is true for the submission. That it's not like I did it once and I'm done.
Yeah, that's it.
I think both of them are continual things.
They have to be.
That if you are God's slave, and that's the other part of it that I think I'd like to touch on, is that the only way that this works is if you first submit yourself to God.
Yeah.
If you submit yourself to God and you trust God to take care of all of your needs, then submitting to any human becomes ultimately easier because you know that you're taken care of. That it's not resting in that one person for all of your needs, wants, and desires. When all of your needs, wants, and desires are resting in God, then it doesn't make that big of a deal to submit to your spouse. And I think we often skip over that in the same way concept.
All right, let's talk about this weaker partner thing.
Oh, you want to talk about that? So this is in verse 7.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Message translation. This is what Peterson has translated. It's kind of interesting. Maybe it helps us a little bit. He says, be good husbands to your wives, honor them, delight in them. As women, they lack some of your advantages. But in the new life of God's grace, you're equals. Treat your wives then as equals so that your prayers don't run aground. As Peter's interpretation, a little bit of his translation of the Greek, of course, but maybe that helps us a little bit to say, the weaker, as Peter's talking about it, is the way that things go in the world, things go in society. Hierarchy, especially in that time they was writing, men had a certain position and women had a certain position. And there was this thought that one was better than the other. And, sometimes we run into that today as well, one being better than the other. And maybe the thing to take away from this is to say, don't do that to the husbands, to say, don't treat your wives in such a way that you take advantage of any sort of weakness that you might perceive or any sort of disadvantage that they might have, but instead lift them up.
Well, and I definitely think that you could say it the other way, like don't abuse your advantage.
Don't abuse your advantage.
Right.
Which, that is a huge problem.
Yeah.
Not just between husbands and wives, but between power. Whenever there's a power disparity, there is the potential for abuse there. We've seen that, and that can happen in relationships as well.
Well, and I think that it, like you were pointing to, it's not always a gender thing. It's just a human thing.
Yeah.
It can be really easy
Yeah.
as a human
Yeah.
to take advantage of your advantage. And we're taught
sure.
a lot to do that, that to sell your strengths and to play down your weaknesses. And
Yeah.
I think that it's really easy to forget that God's strength shines through in our weakness.
Right.
And I think that as a woman, sometimes it can be difficult to say, I can't do it.
Mm.
In fact, there are times in which you're not allowed to say, I can't do it. I have to do it. And women are capable of amazing things. I don't know any man that could push a baby out of them. I mean, that's just not what they're made to do. And women do it all the time, all over the world.
True.
So, it's a different type of strength. But at the same time, sometimes it feels like, I just wish I could just stop. And we have to push ourselves on. And I think that it's really bad for our culture, but it's persistent. That lack of being submissive to God,
Yeah.
I think gets us in a lot of trouble. I think it stops us from resting. It stops us from working in the right places. It stops us from
Right.
being with the right people. That it in some ways goes back to that whole elaborate hairstyles and gold jewelry and fine clothes. That when we don't submit to God, we can get really caught up in the world, and the world isn't looking out for us.
Right. One of the things I really like to do when I mentor young couples that are coming in and maybe wanting to get married, and I have an opportunity to sit down with them, I said, if you really want to have a good marriage, a marriage in which you're happy to be married, a marriage in which you look forward to growing together and growing old together, the real key is to serve one another in love and figuring out what that means every day. And to, especially for people of faith, to have that grow out of our relationship with Christ, because that's what we learned about Jesus, that he served us out of love. And, think for a second, if Christ came to the world and he didn't do that, how differently it would have ended for all of us.
If he said, hold on, I gotta eat.
Yeah, no, this is me time.
Right. I'm gonna go be like Master Carpenter.
Right. And he could have been.
Yeah.
But he made a different choice. And I think, in our relationships with that we have with each other, what it boils down to is learning what it means to really serve one another in love. And that's going to look differently. Here, Peter, for husbands, are talking about be considerate.
Right.
Think about your wives, think about that. And that is, yes, absolutely. That's what it means to serve. Like from a guy to his wife. That's how I can serve Tina. So I really believe in that for a relationship, not even just a marital relationship, but a good relationship, if you really do seek to serve one another in a loving way, you're going to have a good relationship.
I think that's right. One of the things that is bubbling up in my mind, I know that I've read it recently, and I can't remember who I read it from, but it was a parent talking to one of their children, and they said, what you need to know is that nobody outside this... Oh, that's what it was. It was Chris Rock.
Okay.
So...
here we go.
Chris Rock has a Netflix special, and he had so many great things to say, but he talked about this one thing in it, and he said that... he said, what you need to know is that outside of this door, he's standing at his front door, nobody cares. Nobody cares what you can do. Nobody cares who you are outside. And he goes, and inside, there's a couple of us that don't care either. But, and I was thinking about that idea of so many of us have no one that cares for us outside of our front door. We have no one that is seeking to be considerate, seeking to be submissive, no one that is seeking to be in relationship. And I think that part of this, it's two wives and husbands, but I think that it even goes beyond that we have responsibility to the world.
Mm.
As Christians, our responsibility is to the world. And so we need to work against that kind of concept of nobody cares about you outside this door. That part of our job should be taking this loving relationship that is here and carrying it out into the world. That we should be submissive and considerate, loving and kind, gentle and quiet towards others.
Because there are people out there who aren't loved and aren't cared for and are really hurting. And if we just take that time to do that, what a difference that would make.
So on that note, I think we're going to say goodnight, good day, hello, good morning, whatever it may be for you.
Thanks for listening.
Yep, feel free to find us online, www.joelandtinatalk.com.
And if you have any questions or comments, or would love to hear a little more from you about your thoughts on this, we'd love to read that.
Right.
That'd be great.
Yep, you can send your questions to questions@joelandtinatalk.com. And we'll, if we can't get to them on the podcast, we'll do a blog post.
Sure.
Or we'll send you an email directly, depending on what kind of question it is.
Yeah.
All right, so we will see you later.
Yep.
Bye.